for your mercy never fails me. All my days I've been held in your hands. From the moment that I wake up until I lay my head, I will sing of the goodness of God. And all my life you have been faithful. And all my life you have been so, so good. With every breath that I am able, I will sing of the goodness of God. I love your voice. You have led me through the fire. In darkest night, you are close like no other. I've known you as a father. I've known you as a friend. I have lived in the goodness of God. And all my life you have been faithful. And all my life you have been so, so good. With every breath that I am able, I will sing of the goodness of God. Your goodness is running after, it's running after me. Your goodness is running after, it's running after me. With my life laid down, I'm surrendered now. I give you everything. Your goodness is running after, it's running after me. Your goodness is running after, it's running after me. Your goodness is running after, it's running after me. With my life laid down, I'm surrendered now. I give you everything. Your goodness is running after, it's running after me. And all my life you have been faithful. And all my life you have been so, so good. With every breath that I am able, I will sing of the goodness of God. And all my life you have been faithful. And all my life you have been so, so good. With every breath that I am able, I will sing of the goodness of God. I will sing of the goodness of God.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you, Katie. I'd like to go today to a very well-known passage in the Bible. And it's good to go through these well-known passages because there's a reason they're well-known. They're so powerful. Did you ever get in a conversation and somebody said something and you just knew the exact right reply at that moment and you said it and you thought, that was the exact right thing to say at that moment? Normally you think about it 2 days later. Oh, I should have said that. But every once in a while you think, oh, I nailed that one. It seems like Jesus probably had that feeling all the time. I am constantly astounded at the wisdom of his teaching. Not just what he taught, but how he taught it. It was so powerful. The techniques are just so amazing. The little stories that he would tell that just got into people's brains and then exploded in there and just changed the way they thought, where he made it so clear that a child could understand, but so deep that a philosopher could spend their lifetime trying to understand the wisdom of Christ. And so today I want to go to Luke chapter 25, or Luke chapter 10, verse 25. We're going to start at 25 and go on with this story. On one occasion, an expert in the law stood up to test Jesus. "Teacher," he asked, "what must I do to inherit eternal life?" "What is written in the law?" he replied. "How do you read it?" He answered, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your strength, and with all your mind, and love your neighbor as yourself." "You have answered correctly," Jesus replied. "Do this, and you will live." That's just a few verses there, but just such powerful teaching right there already. We haven't even gotten into the major part of this passage. But notice that Jesus didn't answer the question. Jesus often did not answer questions. People would come to him with a question, and his response was often a question back to them. And you have to wonder, why did he do this? A lot of times people would ask the same question: what do I have to do to inherit eternal life? That's one of the big questions of life, maybe the biggest. Because we know this life is short. We fear death. What comes after? Is there a way to escape death? And people would ask this of Jesus many times, and if you notice, he always answered it differently. It's not that he didn't know an answer. It's not that he was making things up. It's he told people exactly what they needed to hear right then. Jesus didn't answer questions for one reason. He wasn't compelled to prove his wisdom. Jesus wasn't all about, look at me and look at how wisely I can answer. Ask me any question, I can give you an answer. Jesus wasn't like that. A lot of times there was a motive behind the question, and Jesus could perceive that, and so he responded accordingly. Think about this ruler, this expert in the law. Why did he ask this question? Did he want to know the answer? He wanted to test Jesus. He's like, I'll see if he has a good answer for this, and if he doesn't, then I'll be able to trick him and out-argue him. So Jesus knows that motive, and so he answers in a way that will help him. I think about the rich ruler. He talked about what did he have to do, and Jesus said, follow the commandments. And he said, I've done that since I was a boy. And he said, okay, one more thing, like it was just a little thing. Sell everything you have, give it to the poor, and come and follow me. He never told anybody else that. But he hit the nail on the head for this one person, and we know that because he turned around and walked away. He had a condition that he wouldn't meet in following Jesus. Nicodemus came to Jesus at night. Here he was, a religious leader, member of the Sanhedrin, an important man, an upstanding citizen, and he came to Jesus and said, what do I have to do? And Jesus said, you must be born again. Nicodemus couldn't understand that. It wasn't that Nicodemus thought Jesus meant literally, but he said, what do you mean be born again? I can't be born again. He couldn't understand that Jesus was saying, Nicodemus, all your religious stuff has led you down the wrong road. You have to go back to the very beginning and start all over again with me. So Jesus here, he doesn't feel it's necessary to give the truth to those who are not seeking it. And I think that's important for us to remember, that there are maybe times when we have to answer a question with a question, or whether we should find out somebody's motives before we answer the question. I think about the man who was healed, and they came and they said, who healed you? And he said, I don't know, this man named Jesus. And then later he got to know Jesus better, and they asked him again, who healed you? And he said, I've already answered that. Why? Do you want to become his disciple too? And they said, you were steeped in sin from your birth, and you want to lecture us? He was asking, what's your motive? Do you want to get healed? Or do you just want to accuse him of something? And he was kind of protective of Jesus, it seems. So I think we should take a lesson from Jesus, that there are times when it is not worthwhile giving out the truth. Jesus said it too. Don't cast your pearls before swine, because they may trample them and then turn and rend you. What a simple way to say such a profound thing. Who would put pearls on a pig? It's just a stupid thing to do. Pearls play around in the mud. They're going to get that pearl all dirty. They're going to walk all over it, crush it and kill it, destroy it. Here's something valuable, and you're giving it to an animal that doesn't care about it. And then he's probably going to attack you too. Do you know pigs can attack you? I talked to some pig farmers, and they have kind of a love-hate relationship with those pigs sometimes, because pigs can be pretty violent sometimes. But what Jesus is saying is, don't give what is sacred to someone who doesn't value it. Sometimes we think we have to argue with people who are just scoffers. We're not called to that. The Bible said a man of God is not called to argue. So does that mean we can be silent about our faith? We never have to witness? Not at all. We should be ready for people who are open to that witness. And sometimes maybe that's sharing your witness and finding out if they're open. And they may attack you for it. They may think you're foolish and say that. And then you say, well, maybe we better hold off on this for now. Maybe you need to live the gospel for them before you tell the gospel to them. So let's live the truth in front of those who aren't ready to hear the truth. But let's not cast pearls before swine. Jesus didn't. He said, how do you read the law? What do you need to do? And he said, love God with everything you have and love your neighbor as yourself. That's exactly what Jesus always said. He must have heard it from Jesus or somebody who was from the circle of Jesus. And Jesus said, you're right. Just do this. Do this and you will live. So this lawyer summarized the law. Jesus said everything in the law, books of the law and the prophets can be summarized in this. Love your neighbor as yourself. He summarized the law. And then Jesus answered him, do this and you will live. Now, is Jesus saying something different from Nicodemus? He told Nicodemus, you have to be born again. Nicodemus was a man of the law. He was trying to follow the law. And Jesus said, you can't do it this way. I think maybe Jesus is telling this teacher of the law, hey, if you think you can do it by the law, more power to you. But just like the rich young ruler who said he was following the law, none of us do. None of us do. We can't be saved by the law. And I think Jesus is saying, if you do this, you will live forever. But that's a big if, because none of us ever do this. How many of us can say, oh, all my life I have loved the Lord my God with all of my heart, all of my soul, all of my strength, all of my will? We can't say that. How many of us can say, yes, I love my neighbor as myself? Well, maybe if you keep it down to that tight circle of neighbors, it's just next door neighbors, right? And I can let the whole rest of the world go. Actually, my next door neighbors, at least one family, they're kind of hard to love. But we won't get into that right now. How can we say we love our neighbor as ourselves? We don't. And so Jesus, if you do this, you will live. Galatians 3:10 through 12 says, for all who rely on the works of the law are under a curse. As it is written, cursed is everyone who does not continue to do everything written in the book of the law. Clearly, no one who relies on the law is justified before God, because the righteous will live by faith. Galatians there is quoting the Old Testament. The law is not based on faith. On the contrary, it says the person who does these things will live by them. So Galatians is saying you have to make a choice. Are you going to try to be saved by the law, or are you going to try to be saved by faith? You better be saved by faith. Because if you're going to try the law, passing score is 100%. You have to do it all the time. You have to do it every moment of your life. So why did this rich young ruler ask this question? He knew the answer. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, strength. Love your neighbor as yourself. And Jesus said, good job. If you can do that, you will live. That can't be the end of the conversation. This guy has to justify somehow, why did I ask a question I already knew the answer for? And so in verse 29, it goes on. But he wanted to justify himself, so he asked Jesus, and who is my neighbor? In reply, Jesus said, a man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho when he was attacked by robbers. They stripped him of his clothes, beat him, and went away, leaving him half dead. A priest happened to be going down the same road, and when he saw the man, he passed by on the other side. So too, a Levite, when he came to the place and saw him, passed by on the other side. But a Samaritan, as he traveled, came where the man was, and when he saw him, he took pity on him. He went to him and bandaged his wounds, pouring on oil and wine. Then he put the man on his own donkey, brought him to an inn, and took care of him. The next day he took out 2 denarii and gave them to the innkeeper. Look after him, he said, and when I return, I will reimburse you for any extra expenses you may have. Which of these 3 do you think was a neighbor to the man who fell into the hands of the robbers? The expert in the law replied, the one who had mercy on him. Jesus told him, go and do likewise. So he says, well, what do you mean by love your neighbor as yourself? Who is my neighbor? How far does this responsibility extend? It is amazing to think that we are required by the law of Christ to love people the way we love ourselves. We just naturally want to put ourselves first, right? If you're not going to look out for number one, who will? And yet Jesus said you're supposed to love others the way you love yourself. Well, I can imagine doing that for a small group of people. Maybe for my wife. Maybe for my kids and grandkids. Just people that I am really close to. I could say, yeah, I would give my life for you. But how far is that supposed to extend? And so that's the question this teacher of the law has. Well, that's pretty high responsibility. How far do I have to go with this? And so Jesus doesn't answer him. He just tells him a story that illustrates the truth. And we know the story. The story is this Jewish man is going on this particularly dangerous road from Jerusalem to Jericho. And along the way, which would have happened many times, he was captured, beaten by the robbers. They took everything he had and left him half dead by the side of the road. And then Jesus has 3 people come by. Classic. The first one is a priest. He walks to the other side of the road and passes. The next one is a Levite, which would be another form of priest in the priestly tribe. And he walked by as well. Now, the priests and the Levites were respected Jewish leaders. These were guys that would normally have been the hero of any story about the Jewish people. The Jewish people really weren't so fond of like their king, because their king was sort of a puppet of Rome. And so he was kind of a collaborator with their invaders. They had a lot of problems with a lot of different people around them. So the religious leaders would have been maybe the most respected people in the communities. So here comes a priest. And I can imagine this teacher of the law thinking, oh, he'll know what to do. And he came by and passed on the other side. And people have tried to think, why would a priest do this? It's possible that he thought this man was already dead. And the Old Testament law forbids a priest from ever touching a dead body. And if they do touch a dead body, even then they have some duties that they have to perform to get clean again. It's called the Tahara law, the uncleanness. So if they touch a dead body against the law, they'd have to break the law to even touch the dead body, then he would have to go through at least 7 days of purification, which would require at least 2 trips to the temple to be washed. It would have taken him a lot of time. It would have been expensive. And if somebody's dead along the side of the road, why do you want to get into all of that? So you just go on by. So it's possible that he thought he was following the law by avoiding this body. Even then it's a problem, though, isn't it? He's following the letter of the law, but he's missing the spirit. And that's what Jesus is always getting on these Pharisees about. Here's a man who needs to be healed, but it's the Sabbath. But Jesus is there and he can heal him from a lifelong illness. And they think Jesus should hold back because, you can't do this on the Sabbath. It wasn't a lot of effort. All he said was, stretch out your hand, and the man's hand was healed. But the Pharisees thought, well, now we've got to kill Jesus because he healed somebody on the Sabbath. How screwed up is their religion that instead of celebrating, this guy has been made whole right in front of our eyes, their first thought was, he didn't do the ritual the right way. He did it on the wrong day. We've got to kill him. As if that's what the law would require of somebody. And here again, this fictional maybe priest, maybe he's following the letter of the law, or at least he thinks he is, but he doesn't have compassion on somebody. Even if he's dead, this guy needs a good burial, and yet he walks by on the other side. It also may be that he thought, well, maybe there's robbers still around, and if I stop to help, I may be putting myself in danger. And again, I'm the most important. I can't risk my safety to help somebody else, even if they're hurt lying on the side of the road. And the Levite went by as well, and there's another one that could have done something good. He could have loved somebody like he loved himself, but he didn't, and so he walked on by. On the other hand, the Samaritans were the worst outsiders Jesus could have picked. If you talk to a Jew at the time, they would not have been big fans of the Greeks. They would not have been big fans of the Romans. They wouldn't have really had a lot of fondness for the Egyptians. They usually had wars scheduled right around Israel, and it was always these foreign countries. The Babylonians, the Assyrians, all sorts of different countries would come in and they'd take over Israel and make them pay money and kill a bunch of them. And so they had a lot of trouble with a lot of outsiders. But for the Jews, the worst of all was the Samaritans, because the Samaritans claimed to be Israeli. They said that they were from the people that the Assyrians, when they attacked the northern kingdom of Israel, they had taken the people out, some of them, and a few stayed. And they said, well, we've stayed here. We've kept the law of God. And they claimed to be people of God. The Jews assumed that they had intermarried with the Assyrians and were half-breeds. And so in their racist philosophy, that was the worst of the worst. Because not only were they outsiders, but they were outsiders pretending to be insiders. And so they didn't have them come to Jerusalem to worship at the temple. And so the Samaritans built a temple on Mount Gerizim. Remember, we talked about before in another sermon, the two mountains, Mount Ebal and Mount Gerizim. And one was the mountain of cursing, and Gerizim was the mountain of blessing. So they built a temple there, and they worshiped God there. And you remember the Samaritan woman at the well? When Jesus started to talk about her life, she tried to change the subject to the religious argument between the Jews and Samaritans. Hey, your people say we ought to worship in Jerusalem. My people say we ought to worship on this mountain. Who's right? And Jesus said, a time is coming and has now come when you won't worship either place. Now the time is that we're going to worship God in spirit and in truth. But even during Jesus' time, there was no temple on Mount Gerizim. Why? Because about 150 years before that, the Jewish Maccabean leader, John Hyrcanus, had destroyed it. you can't worship Yahweh here, and we're going to make sure you don't. And so they tore down the temple. So they did not have a very good relationship with the Samaritans. And then Jesus decides to make him the hero of the story. Along comes a Samaritan, and he took pity on him. He bandaged his wounds, pouring on oil and wine. He put the man on his own donkey, brought him to an inn to take care of him. He didn't say, hey, I found this guy. Somebody's going to have to take care of him. He said, here, if you'll take care of him, I'll pay you for it. He gave him 2 days' wages, and he said, when I come back, any other expenses? Can you imagine picking up somebody on the roadside here, taking him to Memorial Hospital and saying, hey, whatever the expenses are, I'll pay for it? I guess maybe our healthcare costs have gotten out of hand on that, but that's what he said. Whatever it costs, I'll take care of it. Why was it his responsibility? It wasn't. Unless we're responsible to love others the way we love ourselves. So Jesus is telling by this story, there is no one outside your obligation to love. There is no one outside your obligation to love. It's not always easy to love others, though, is it? How can there be no boundary? It seems like there has to be a boundary. I remember one social media influencer who said he was against the idea of unconditional love because he said, if you love everybody unconditionally, what incentive do they have to be better than they are? And so he thought you ought to withhold your love, I guess, in order to encourage people to be better people. I still think he didn't understand what the Bible means by love. I think he was thinking it means unconditional affirmation, unconditional acceptance. That whatever you do, I think it's great. Here we are on Father's Day. Any father or mother has to understand that that's not what love means. Certainly, there are times when you love people and don't approve of their actions, right? That's the way it is with kids. Certainly, when we talk about we have to love everybody in the world, certainly there are bad people in the world that we shouldn't approve of, right? You mean we're supposed to, we can go to the extreme level and say, what about Pol Pot or Stalin or Hitler? Are we supposed to love somebody like that, we can say? And my answer is, well, I certainly don't approve of everything they did, but in a sense, we are called to love them as well. We can love them at least to the extent of lamenting what could they have done with their abilities if they were serving God with their abilities. What a terrible life they wasted. And now to probably be in hell for eternity. What a terrible thing that happened. If somebody is still alive, we can pray for them to change and repent as well. We don't even have to go to extremes, though. We can think about just people, we run into all the time. The person that cuts you off in traffic, and obviously they don't care about that they cut you off in traffic. Sometimes people make a mistake, but there's some people that just like to cut people off in traffic. There's people that like to cause trouble. We're called to love people like that too? Yeah, we are. Doesn't mean we're supposed to like people cutting off people in traffic. It just means we're supposed to care about them, lament their sin, and pray for them, and do what we can that their life would be better. Love doesn't necessarily mean a warm, attractive feeling. Sometimes it entails that, but it doesn't always. And I think the saying is true that you love the sin, or you love the sinner and hate the sin. Now, some people will reject that and say, if you love me, you will approve of everything I do. But like I said, every parent knows that's not true, because you got to say no when your kids are doing the wrong thing, no matter how much you love them. My grandkids have developed this thing they got from I think they got it from the Bluey television show, but they have a please face. A please face is when they really want something, and you say no, and then they turn on their please face. And it usually entails, it's different for every one of the kids, but they usually furrow their brow like they're sad. And then they put their head down and they look up at you. Sometimes they clasp their hands together. And then they put their mouth like they're going to cry. And they say, please. And they actually get together and do it. Jordan and Eddie will say, let's do our please face, please. And then you say, okay, I'll spray the whipped cream right into your mouth. It's a powerful weapon. But even then, you have to say, don't give me the please face. I'm still not going to let you put a fork into the electrical outlet. It's not a good thing, and I'm not going to let you do it. Because we know that there's times when you have to say, that's not right. You can't do that. When we talk about loving the sinner and hating the sin, isn't that what we do with ourselves? I don't approve of everything I do. And I think, oh, I should be better than that. And I want myself to do better. But I never stop loving myself and wanting the best for me. But I still don't approve of everything I do. Those who have dealt with people with addiction and their family members, they know that you don't always approve of what people do that you love. In fact, when you love them, you might say to them, please stop drinking. It's destroying your life. Please stop doing drugs or whatever the addiction is. It may be clearer in those cases, but every sin is destructive. Sometimes physically, but always spiritually. And so certainly we can't say, well, we ought to approve of everything somebody does. But we are called to love. And in fact, the more you love someone, the more you will hate their sin. Now, this doesn't mean that we always go around telling everybody, well, if I see you do anything wrong, I'm going to step up, I'm going to tell you that that's wrong. You have to have discernment about what is your relationship, what is your place in this relationship, when can you speak and when can't you. And that's exactly what Jesus did when sometimes he would answer a question with a question or sometimes with a story. Sometimes Jesus knew that just stating out the truth isn't enough. He has to respond with what that person needs and is ready to accept right at that moment. So Jesus told this little story, and then he made it so simple that even a child could answer the question, which of these three do you think was a neighbor to the man who fell into the hands of the robbers? Notice what he did there. He switched the question. You should not ask, is he my neighbor? You should ask, am I a neighbor? Because there's no question about who can be a neighbor. Anybody can be a neighbor. But the question is, are you going to be a neighbor? And so Jesus took this man's question, told this story, and then he turned it all around. Which of the three do you think was a neighbor to the man? And the guy couldn't even, he couldn't even call him a Samaritan, the one who had mercy on him. Jesus said, yeah, go and do likewise. This is what you're required to do. This is what you're called to do. And this is Jesus' ethic. It is an ethic that's higher than any other moral teacher that's ever made a splash in history. Because it's not enough to say, don't hurt others. Jesus said, you have a responsibility to love others. And that is what we're called to as believers. Let's pray.